But ultimately, the way you overcome it is that you develop technical expertise and build in that kind of confidence where you speak up at the right time. And you also read the room and make judgments as to when something is an issue versus a non-issue.
Well, before a merger becomes a headline, before a $1 billion valuation makes the news, there is a lawyer in the room asking the hardest questions and quietly shaping outcomes that will affect millions. Our guest for today has been that lawyer on some of India's most complex and high-stakes transactions, from landmark mergers to regulatory reforms studied by global institutions. Her work sits at the intersection of law, power, and policy. Today, we step inside that world, not to talk just numbers, but to understand the journey behind them. Ladies and gentlemen, I, Isha Anand, bring to you Tanya Pahwa, a corporate M&A attorney in New York. Hello, Ms. Tanya. How are you?
Hi, Isha. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind introduction.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll start with the very early stage of your career, if you're ready for the questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, early in your career, you have held key roles at India's leading corporate law firms, advising on high-value, high-impact transactions. What strengths or accomplishments positioned you as a recognized expert in the field at such an early age?
Sure. First and foremost, it's really the platform that the law firms gave me. I was fortunate enough to work with some of the most sharpest creative minds in the country, and they gave me the structural platform to be able to grow and showcase my abilities on these various matters. But now, when I talk about it from an individual perspective, what really helped me in the beginning was building that trust and credibility within the team, as well as with my clients, having not just the right or excellent work product in those crunch timelines, but also focusing on the risks that a client faces, what kind of drivers are there for the deal, and what is the client's commercial objective that they're looking to achieve, and also understanding the mindset of your counterparties as to how they look at the deal and what are their expectations out of it. Having that kind of a mindset and presenting optimized solutions to your clients, not just de-risking them or shielding them from any sort of legal or reputational risks, also giving them commercial solutions that are really optimized for their objectives from a long-term strategic perspective. Focusing on that helped me build that trust with my clients as well as internally with the partners and colleagues.
You transitioned from India to Columbia Law School, followed by practicing corporate law in the US, and that reflects a truly global legal journey. What inspired this shift, and how has it strengthened your ability to lead on cross-border high-value matters?
What inspired that shift really was a little bit of a mix of intellectual curiosity, and I really wanted to scale my impact in this field. I worked for almost a decade in India for a lot of international clients who were either trying to set up shop in India or trying to do investments or these M&A transactions in India. I could always witness the kind of dissonance they feel in some way in navigating a truly regulated market such as India. I'll give you a very small example. It's in terms of director liability. When you look at India with the Companies Act, there's a whole list of criminal provisions that could really come into play in case there's any sort of breach or any non-compliances. From a foreign director perspective, that's kind of scary to navigate. Let's assume if they're coming from the US, maybe the lay of the land is slightly different, where they are not used to those kind of stringent provisions. And maybe the whole way in which directors conduct themselves is really driven by the kind of duties you have under Delaware law, for instance. And so having seen that kind of difference, I wanted to be on the other side also. So moving to the US was mostly about decoding the legal ecosystem here and to gain that kind of fluency across different legal systems to be able to advise them better.
This might have been a little challenging, I would say, from India to US. How did you overcome that?
Especially in my case, I was moving after a lot of time in India. So when you've spent a decade in different law firms, you're used to that kind of ecosystem and you uproot yourself from that system. Most often, you're doing that without any sort of scaffolding. You, in a way, have to reinvent yourself or reestablish your trust with the peers or the leaders here at different law firms in the US. So that is one of the biggest challenges I faced, which was going back to law school after those many years of practice and also navigating the professional landscape that changed. That was quite challenging. And what really helped me was having this level of open mindedness to it, where I did not want my prior experience to define my experience in the US. And that really helped me become adaptable in this scenario.
What I have taken from this is that you need to work hard, take challenges, take chances, and you will make your own path.
In a traditional setup or a field like law, which is very conservative, there's always this danger of becoming used to a certain kind of pattern. If you keep that mind open and don't set artificial ceilings for yourself and you're creative enough or courageous enough to create that path, it's very rewarding at the end of the day.
So you have developed recognized experience in M&A and private equity. I want to know what drew you to these areas. And was there a particularly complex or high-profile transaction that confirmed your long-term commitment to this specialization?
My interest in M&A PE developed in my law school years. So I naturally gravitated towards subjects like contract law or companies law or securities law. I could clearly see in terms of my score and my competence, that's where my interest lies. And I never really second guessed my decision after that. I started interning when I was in law school at law firms and actively seeking out corporate matters. And then I built from there. Not once during my career in India or in the US has that thought crossed my mind that I have wanted to digress from that path. So it's been very rewarding to also have been consistent in that field of work. In terms of transactions that inspired me to do it, I wouldn't say there was a single transaction that led me to that decision, but I will say that early on in my career, when I first joined a law firm, and the first matter I did was a corporate dispute. So here we were dealing with foreign investors and some of the biggest names in the market, and they were navigating various challenges within the boardroom and outside of it with different Indian promoters in the power sector in India. Every day of the week, we were looking at new corporate issues, new kinds of fights or claims that were coming up. And we constantly had to adjust our legal strategy. And that dispute was fought at different levels of judiciary in India. And there was ultimately an arbitration in Singapore that turned in our favor. And this entire experience lasted me a couple of years, maybe more. And this was a formative matter for me in my life. It taught me various ways in which a transaction document is going to be picked apart and a lot of ways in which it's going to be litigated and how not to draft certain provisions. That gave me a front row seat to all kinds of issues under companies law or foreign investment regime or some of the other laws that were impacted. It helped me develop that skill set for transactional structuring going on. That was fundamental to my interest in corporate law and transactional side of things.
So what I have taken from this is the very first thought that comes to your mind related to your interest is the thing that interests you the most, and you should never doubt your choice, right? And then you'll do wonders.
Yeah. As long as you're sure of your choices and the kind of law you want to practice, you can stick to it. But I want to say that there's also people who kind of down the line realize, well, that's not where their skill set lies and they want to do something else. What I would like to say is that you should always be open to reinvent yourself. And if you want to change your path at any time, you feel that you need to get into a different direction, a different practice area. Sometimes the shift is really from corporate to litigation. Sometimes it's not even law. Sometimes you get into GC roles or commercial counsel, or you become founders of different companies, and that's completely okay.
Among all the challenges you faced, was being a woman in this field a challenge for you? Because M&A landscape is highly demanding and highly competitive. So, as a woman excelling in this space, how have you demonstrated resilience in leadership? And what challenges have you had to navigate while building your reputation?
Resilience for me has been about sustained performance over time despite changes. By that, I mean adaptability, whether it's different kinds of deals or professional setups. Now, the shift being very obvious between India and the US. From a leadership perspective, I think it's always been about when to lean in, when to ask for help, because ultimately the deals are led by teams and created by teams. So, creating that space for other people and knowing when to step up. So, those are the two things. In terms of the challenges that I faced as a woman, it's mostly about being able to advocate for yourself. A lot of us face that kind of challenge, especially early on in your career when you're not all that confident and you're still building on the competence part of it. So, building that kind of skill set takes some time. And that's one unique challenge women face. But ultimately, the way you overcome it is that you develop technical expertise and build in that kind of confidence where you speak up at the right time. And you also read the room and make judgments as to when something is an issue versus a non issue.
So, where was it more challenging? Was it in India or in US?
I can't say that one place was more challenging than the other because every place had its own set of challenges. And I'll also say that at every stage of your career, you'll face different challenges. In the beginning, it was something completely different. I spoke about being visible and taking ownership to growing to a point where now suddenly I'm not just the woman in the room, but I'm also the woman of color in the room. There's always times where you're the youngest in the room, or you're the only woman in the room, you're the woman of color in the room. No chance is bigger than the other. But the way you navigate that part is humanizing the whole experience. When you look at your counterparties or partners or your internal stakeholders you're dealing with, understanding the structures within which you're operating. So, the Indian law firm setup may be different from what it is in the US, and how you communicate and how you conduct yourself could be very different. And I think just understanding that really helps.
Right. So, different places, different challenges, and you have perfectly overcome those obstacles, I would say.
I wouldn't say perfectly, but it's always a work in progress.
So, you have advised across two major legal systems, US and India. So, how has this cross-border experience enhanced your strategic value on complex deals? And how do clients benefit from your dual jurisdictional expertise?
This answer ties into the previous one that I spoke about briefly, wherein I was talking about the shift from India to the US and why that happened, and really where that adds value. The benefit has been definitely gaining that strategic lens at navigating cross border transactions. So now when I'm thinking not just from a single jurisdiction perspective. I have a maybe more panoramic view of legal issues and addressing risks. And they add strategic value when you can understand where your client comes from, their institutional challenges, their challenges in a particular market, and then helping them not just react to different jurisdictional issues when it comes to cross-border transactions, but also anticipating those issues. I'll talk about an example in corporate law. For instance, in India, there's all sorts of restrictions around pricing of a deal, whether it comes from Companies Act or the FDI policy or even the takeover code. And then move to a country where maybe pricing is not, from a legal perspective, not that big a concern. Maybe there are no barriers or restrictions around how you need to do that. And that changes how you view deals. Things that were big issues in India are maybe non-issues in the US context, and vice versa. To have the kind of depth to know the local expectation standards and market trends only come from practicing in different jurisdictions.
So all the high stakes matters that you have handled. Can you tell me which transaction best demonstrates your leadership or critical role? And how did you contribute to its successful resolution?
I've worked on some high impact transactions that have been complex in their own right. I worked in the financial services sector for a very long time. So a lot of M&A deals I did in that sector were highly regulated. One of the deals that really stands out has always been a merger of a banking institution and a non-banking institution in the financial services sector in India. And the reason it stands out is because we didn't have a legal framework or market precedent in terms of how you structure that merger and how do you get approvals. My role on that transaction especially was about leading that regulatory analysis that led to the entire structuring. It was foundational to the transaction. And then leading the execution and the closing of that transaction, of course, alongside my partners. That experience really gave me that creative way of thinking. Another one I want to talk about is a private investment into, again, financial services. And this transaction was a multi-layered transaction, which involved a lot of restructuring within the group and triggered almost, I want to say, close to 65 to 70 regulatory filings. So it was complex in that way. And there was all sorts of tax challenges that came up in that transaction. We had about a week from scratch to finish to get to signing of that deal. And this was during COVID. And it was an extremely strenuous exercise to lead the regulatory aspects of that deal. I led the investment documentation part of that deal as well. And the key challenge I faced on that deal was that in a short period of time, we were required to stitch together the deal. There were multiple aspects that were happening at the same time. So there's a restructuring going on. Then you're looking at the investment side of things, but you're also negotiating shareholder rights. And so to stitch that together with the team in such a short period of time and get a cohesive deal, I think it was very challenging.
That's great. So recently, what are some of the most complex or high impact corporate transactions that you have advised on in the US? And how do these deals present unique legal or strategic challenges? And in what ways you have delivered value through your expertise in those cases?
Recently, I've switched gears a little bit. I'm still doing M&A, but now it's a different regulated sector here. I've been working on some of the most complex energy infrastructure deals that are driven by the AI boom that we're all witnessing. So AI infrastructure, especially data centers, they are extremely power intensive. And with the exponential increase in demand for sustainable energy sources, we've seen an uptick in those kind of deals where data centers developers are looking to build long-term power generation assets, especially from renewable sources, including sources like nuclear. And so those deals are complex in their own way, wherein we're navigating legal issues on constructing, permitting, licensing, and state and federal regulatory framework in the energy sector. It is a once in a generation sort of an opportunity for a lawyer when you're looking at powering the digital infrastructure in a company. And these are long-term solutions you're going to provide. So each deal spans across years and involves multi-billion dollars worth of investments and multiple stakeholders. It's a unique kind of confluence of infrastructure, energy law, corporate law, real estate law, and like many other aspects. And I am excited to be part of that and at the center stage of that.
That's interesting. With this, we come to our last question. What do you advise our young lawyers aspiring to break into high stakes transaction law? And what do you think are the 3 professional skills you believe that are essential for law students aiming to succeed in this field?
All right, so I'll start with the skills. I think developing technical expertise, it goes without saying. You should never stop reading and you should always be updated with the legal developments and the industry updates. That's first and foremost. Having communication skills is very important. Being able to articulate your thoughts and issues in a distilled manner to clients and offering solutions. Third is being consistent, delivering value over time and having steady results across, because this is a long career and it really pays to compound on your reputation as a trusted advisor over a period of time. Those 3 things are very important. The advice would be to show up and not be afraid to ask for complicated work while you're working in different settings. You should throw yourself in situations that challenge you and allow you to grow and learn from those experiences. It pays a lot of dividends in the long term if you do that. So don't be afraid or don't wait to be ready, but just jump into things and you learn on the job and seek out mentors actively who help you through these processes and help you grow as a professional.
Right. So together, if we take out from this answer, enhance your technical skills, enhance your communication skills, show up, take challenges. When you take challenges, this actually expands the horizon of your thoughts. You're
Yeah.
not restricted to what you have only studied, but you think beyond that. Thank you so much. So today's conversation was actually very inspiring. It was about discipline, growth, and long-term vision. Thank you so much, Ms. Tanya, for sharing your journey with us, your expertise with us, and especially for your time. And to those who are watching us, thank you for staying with us for this long. I hope you found this conversation very inspiring. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and stay inspired.